What's happening, everybody? Ryan Thomas here on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast for another edition, another episode, another Wednesday episode, which means another guest on the TTSP. None other than NYUp.com very own Ryan Talbot. How's it going, Ryan?
Hey, doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's been a bit. We met back at the Buffalo Potathon at the Buffalo River Works. I've had your colleague Matt Perino of NYUp.com on a few times, and me and him go back a few years, and it's good to finally get you on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on.
Yeah, especially during all this frenzy within the free agent world that's going on right now, and not just within the free agent world, but in the real world, we got a lot going on. I just got some breaking news that Jacksonville traded Nick Foles to the Chicago Bears. We got some news that Todd Gurley could quite possibly be a free agent tomorrow. And as well, our Buffalo Bills, very own Buffalo Bills, have been extremely active, Ryan, in this free agency period. But most importantly, they made a massive trade the other night, acquiring Stefon Diggs. Take me through what that was, like when you first heard the news, and take me through some of the emotions that you're feeling through this off-season process.
Yeah, sure. Tampering obviously began earlier that afternoon, and it was kind of a slow go for the Bills in that regard. Nothing was really out there. Some reported interest in certain players, but they hadn't really signed anyone at that point, or they weren't going to at that point in time. So I was going back and forth with Matt of Matt Perino, and we were talking a little bit about, when should you expect stuff to happen, and we were saying, no, it can happen anytime, late at night, middle of the night, you name it. And sure enough, probably an hour after that, maybe half an hour after that text, first they signed A.J. Klein, so we both went to work on our articles in that regard. And then within minutes of that, it was the Diggs trade. And the Diggs trade was a big one because obviously earlier that afternoon, DeAndre Hopkins had been traded from the Texans to the Arizona Cardinals, and the Texans did not get much on their return there by any means. Whereas the Bills did have to give up a first-round pick, fourth-round pick, fourth, fifth, sixth, but the fourth is in 2021. Right. So they had to give up some picks there in that regard, but they also have a wide receiver that is a true number one that's under contract through 2023 and has a very manageable cap hits. Will Diggs want that contract to get reworked? Very possible, but too early to say at this point. But right now, all of a sudden, Josh Allen has a pretty solid 1-3 with Diggs, with John Brown just coming off of a career best year, and with Cole Beasley in the slot. So major upgrades there. You have Dawson Knox entering year two, Devin Singletary entering year two. So a lot of promise to that offense after that Stefon Diggs trade.
Yeah, and I think, looking forward to the future, I think the best thing that we could say about the Bills is that since Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have taken over the roster, they have brought in this massive, youth movement, and you laid out some of those players, Josh Allen, Singletary, and now Stefon Diggs. Diggs, in my opinion, is probably one of the more underrated receivers in the league. I do not think he has reached his full potential, and I could say the same thing for Josh Allen, although he's only in year two, heading into year three. What does a move like this do for him in that quote-unquote window bridge year where you're really looking to see Josh Allen take that next step? What does this move do for Josh Allen within that concept?
Oh, I think it helps him take the next step at quarterback, obviously. One of the big things that happened after the trade is they were talking about Brian Daboll's usage of the 11 personnel from week 1 to week 10, and then how he used it later on in the season. And now he actually has a wide receiver that really fits that personnel well. You have 3 legitimate targets at wide receiver. I'm not against drafting another one, whether it's with the second round or the third round pick that they still have in this year's draft in such a deep wide receiver class. Add a 4th wide receiver to that unit. You want to get him as many weapons as possible because this is the window for the Bills right now, and it sounds funny saying a window for the Super Bowl, so to speak. They haven't won a playoff game in quite some time. But with Tom Brady leaving the division, I think the Bills are the favorites to win the division as of right now. Now, a lot can change between the draft, between what happens in the preseason. Obviously injuries happen, things happen in that regard. But right now, I think the Bills should be viewed as the favorite to win the division. So there you go. There's the playoff, getting into the playoffs again.
Right.
And then obviously, when you have a quarterback on a rookie deal, this is the time where you need to build up that roster to try to take a swing at the Super Bowl. And some people are going to raise their eyes at that or roll their eyes at that. But I think this team has enough talent to really make some noise in the AFC. The Chiefs are going to be a perennial powerhouse year in, year out with Mahomes. There's no arguing that. But you kind of look across the landscape. The Texans just lost their best wide receiver. There's a lot of issues going on there now, especially after what was reported today about Bill O'Brien and how he talked to DeAndre Hopkins and that relationship there.
Right.
So you look at the South and that division I don't want to say it's wide open for the taking, because I think Jacksonville's obviously in a clear rebuild there. But you look at the West, the Chargers missed out on Tom Brady. Who knows what's going to go on there, whether they're going to be competitive. I think Denver is a team that's on the rise, but they're not going to necessarily be a powerhouse there either. Raiders, who knows? I think there's a lot of uncertainty there with Carr still as well. So, you look across the whole AFC, and besides the Chiefs, I'm not sure I would say that there's another team that I would say, that's blocking the Bills from making some noise in that conference over these next few years if Josh Allen takes that next step. And that's what Diggs should help him do. Allen came in, they said there were concerns across the board, very raw prospect. They knocked his short and intermediate game well. He's actually going to be pretty decent in that regard. So now they're knocking the deep ball and the long ball, and there were some very bad deep passes last year where he overthrew his receivers by a clear 5-10 yards, whatever the case may be. But obviously I think that's going to be a focal point for him in his training that he does during the offseason. And having a guy like Diggs that can really stretch the field, having a guy like John Brown that can stretch the field, that those two guys is your 1-2. That's pretty great for Josh Allen entering year 3.
Couldn't agree more. And in terms of the hierarchy of the AFC, we touched on it there. One huge factor for me that kind of put a huge change in the quote-unquote power rankings outside of DeAndre Hopkins going from the Houston Texans to the Arizona Cardinals, and outside of some of the roster moves that we've seen, the one main move, honestly, albeit the guy is 43 years old, but to be quite honest, I had thought for quite a few weeks that Tom Brady was going to end up a Los Angeles Charger, and now Tom Brady is in the NFC, reportedly signing a deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So that also kind of leaves the AFC wide open. You have Rivers and Indy, but there's a little bit of uncertainty there of what's going on. So in terms of, I've said it a few times on the show, but I really think the next step, even with Brady on the Patriots for the Buffalo Bills, was to win the division. Now that Brady is out of the division and out of the conference, this really changes a lot for Buffalo moving forward.
Yeah, without a doubt, and a lot of fans are pointing to Buffalo's schedule. Well, I mean, the rest of the AFC has to play a pretty comparable schedule. Obviously, there's some wiggle room there in terms of like the fourth place team playing the fourth place team from another division, things like that. But the Bills and the rest of the division there have to play the NFC West this year, for example. That's going to be a tough go of it for all four teams.
Right.
So when people are sitting there saying, "Oh, this is a tough schedule, it's a brutal schedule," you shouldn't be expecting the Bills to necessarily maybe finish 10-6 again. Well, maybe not. Maybe 9-7 takes the division this year, but the teams within this division are all playing a pretty tough slate in 2020. So kind of throw the schedule argument out the window. Look at the talent. I read a good article today. I want to say it was from the Draft Network saying that the Patriots are closer to a rebuild than they are contending in 2020. And you see all the losses, not just Tom Brady.
Right.
But the losses across the board there. And you can make a valid point that they're a little bit closer to saying, okay, we need to kind of tear this down a little bit. See what we have in Stidham or whoever they want to bring in at quarterback before you can legitimately look at them. The Jets have been pretty quiet in free agency. They've added a few offensive linemen, but they missed out on a lot of the bigger names. And that may be a blessing in disguise because who knows how George Fant, that's their big signing so far, is going to work out on that line. But, the Bills took a chance on Quentin Spain last year. It was a very manageable deal, obviously, and it worked out for them where he's now re-signed for 3 years. They took a shot on a John Feliciano. He started many games for the Bills this past season, played very well. So it's not always the big names that you need, but they haven't necessarily done enough to add more talent or for Sam Darnold, especially with Robbie Anderson up in the air. He hasn't signed anywhere yet as of our talk right now.
Right.
The Dolphins are making a lot of really solid moves. They're throwing a lot of money around to do it. But, I think they're trying to speed up their rebuild because it looked like it was going to take some time. But I think Flores built a pretty solid culture there in year one. There was a lack of talent on that team, yet they were in a lot of football games throughout the year. So I think they have a really good coach in place. I think they have some talent. I think they've added a lot of talent there, so I think they can at least be more competitive, make some noise within the division. But there's no one team where I say, the Bills have to look out for them in this division. The Patriots without Tom Brady, to be determined. We'll see what they're going to do at quarterback.
Right.
I know he did fall off a little bit last year, but that he was still the guy that the Bills could not defeat. 32-3 all-time against Buffalo. No matter how he played, they seemed to always find a way to win those games. So if they can overtake the division starting in 2020, they can start worrying about the Chiefs and the Ravens to a lesser effect. I don't want to discount the Ravens. I think they have a very talented team. I think they've made some really good moves and trades here this offseason. But I will say that I think defenses might figure out Lamar Jackson a little bit more. We saw Buffalo use a blueprint that Tennessee then said in the playoffs we used that, and we were able to put up points, and it really put Baltimore behind the eight ball. So Lamar Jackson, if he takes that next step, they could obviously be a year-in, year-out contender in the AFC as well. But right now, the only team that I can legitimately say that about is going to be their year-in, year-out, a real threat to the AFC is the Chiefs.
I completely agree. And oddly enough, going back to last season when Buffalo met with Baltimore, the game ended. It was fairly close. Buffalo's defense was stout. The offense just had some shortcomings towards the end there. A real tight, close game. John Harbaugh even said after that game, that's going to be a team that we're going to be competing against for quite some time. And then, you fast forward a few months later, and at the scouting combine, I believe, John Harbaugh was talking about how the Buffalo Bills have built, a pretty decent, organization over the last few years under Sean McDermott's leadership. So, there is a lot of positives within that. And to kind of go back to what we were talking about with New England, I think that there's a perception out there that although Tom Brady is not on the team, and although that, Kyle Van Noy and Jamie Collins and some of the other guys that have walked out the building there are on other teams, that one guy still remains, and that is Bill Belichick. And that goes to my next point, and a huge talking point that I had prepared for the show today, talking with you, is that there's always this conversation about who made who made Bill Belichick, or did Tom Brady make Bill Belichick, or did Bill Belichick make Tom Brady? And you go to ESPN, you go to a lot of the major media outlets, and I've always found that conversation to be a little bit silly, and maybe it's because I've been on the receiving end of watching Tom Brady and Bill Belichick beat us, as you said, 32 out of 35 times, that to me it's not who made who, but can't we just say that they made each other? They made each other great?
Yeah, I think they both benefited from one another. I think that Belichick put together a pretty strong defensive unit throughout Tom Brady's entire tenure in New England, and I think that obviously helped too with if you can keep opposing teams off the scoreboard, so to speak, or keep them under 20 points. It was pretty easy for Brady, especially in those prime years, to one, score points for the Patriots, but two, blow out teams, which, the Bills were on their fair share of those losses. And there were times, though, where if the defense had an off day, Brady could come to the rescue and lead that offense. So they had a relationship that was mutually beneficial. And some people will point and say, well, look at the year that Brady tore his ACL. Matt Castle came in and had a pretty strong year. And that's true, but there's a lot of talent on that team as well. You could also point out the year that Brady was suspended, that the Bills played them, and Rex Ryan's team shut them out 16-0. It wasn't a blowout win by any means, but that was the effect of not having Brady that given Sunday. The Bills were able to shut that team down. So, I think that both of them are going to go down in history, if not the greatest, greatest quarterback, greatest head coach. They're at least going to always be in that discussion. So, but at the same time, yeah, they absolutely benefited from being with one another.
And now we wonder, how will that work itself out with Brady in Tampa Bay? And I got to say, outside of fits that made sense for Tom Brady in L.A. The Raiders were being thrown around, but I didn't really look at Tampa for whatever reason. I should have. I feel like Tampa was that team that kind of stuck out like a sore thumb due to the fact that Jameis Winston threw 30 for 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, and the fact that Bruce Arians, said after the season was over that they could win with anybody. If they could win with Winston playing as bad as he did, that they could win with anybody. I'm paraphrasing there, but that was kind of to the tune of what he was saying and what the quote was. And you have a shot at bringing in, albeit 42, 43-year-old Tom Brady to pair with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, O.J. Howard. And I don't think they're done with just that. They're going to add more pieces, obviously. I think that this is a pretty good fit, but how do you see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers season playing itself out in that NFC with Tom Brady?
Well, within the team itself, he has all the talent in the world at wide receiver, probably the best wide receiver duo in the league in Evans and Godwin. I'm a huge Godwin fan. I was on that bandwagon when he came out in the draft. I thought he was going to be maybe I didn't realize he was going to be this great, but I definitely saw him being a really good wide receiver in the NFL. So he has a great 1-2. He has some solid tight ends. What's going to be interesting is those yearly matchups against the Saints. That's going to be must-watch TV. Within the regular season, I'm sure they'll also probably meet up in the postseason as well sometimes. It's just going to be one of those matchups where as long as Brady and Breeze are around, it's going to be something to kind of keep an eye on there. But you look at the rest of the division, Carolina, I think it's safe to say they're in a rebuild right now. They're kind of tearing it down a little bit. They're going to move on from Cam, obviously. I like the signings that they've made, but I don't see them being in that echelon of competing in 2020. It's a year-to-year league. Windows open and close all the time in terms of playoff windows, Super Bowl windows, so on and so forth. And the Falcons still have some talent, but I just feel like they've kind of underachieved these last few years with what they've had. I'm not sure that they're going to be in that same discussion as well. He is entering a pretty decent division, though, like I said, with the Saints there. The Falcons usually give a good fight. So there's three decent teams there. We'll see with the Panthers. I do think that the path to the Super Bowl, I don't want to say is easier in the NFC because you do have some solid teams in the West with the 49ers, obviously, who represented the NFC this year. The Seahawks are going to be good. Arizona's on the rise, obviously. I think the Rams are on the way down. But there's some talented teams in every division. I just think that maybe he has a little bit easier path in the NFC.
Yeah, and you got to try new things sometimes. He was in the AFC for 20 years, and this is uncharted territory for any player. I think, if my memory serves me right, I can't remember. Maybe you could fill me in on this one, but I can't remember a player playing on one franchise for 20 years and then playing for somebody else. Usually when you play on one franchise for 20 years, you do retire. So there were guys like Brett Favre, Joe Montana, Peyton Manning. They all played for different teams. So it's not like it's out of the ordinary that a player spends stays in one place for so long only to go somewhere else. But it looks so weird seeing these pictures that are photoshopped of Tom Brady in those god-awful Tampa Bay Bucs jerseys. They're changing those jerseys, right? They got to go back to something else outside of those ones.
Yeah, I believe something leaked, and they're going to the ones that they had during the Rondé Barber years. So it's better. I'm a fan of the creamsicle uniforms personally, but it's definitely better. But you're right. It has happened in the NFL, in other major sports. But when you first see it, it's still a little out there. It's still a little bizarre and odd to see. But, with time, seeing him out there on the field, obviously it'll become the new normal for however long it lasts.
Do you think that Tom Brady wanted to leave ultimately, or do you think that it was a mutual thing, or do you think Belichick was kind of like, hey, we're moving on from you?
I think Brady wanted to leave. I think that
that's what I said too.
Came out yesterday and said, if he wanted to stay, we would have figured out a way to make it work. I just think he kind of said, I want to go off and see what I can do on my own. Because, maybe he has heard the whispers over the years of, you've benefited from being with Belichick. Maybe this is like a chip on his shoulder. Maybe just that relationship with Belichick had run its course. With anyone that you're with for that long, you're going to have your ups and downs, your arguments, your agreements. So I just think that Brady said it was time for me to move on and go somewhere else. And he picked a pretty solid spot. He picked a team that's also in win-now mode because Bruce Arians, he's not going to be around coaching for many more years. I think he just wants to be around maybe a handful more seasons before he calls it a career. So he knows that Tampa Bay is going to be, full steam ahead in terms of chasing a championship ring.
And on paper, I mean, we dove into it a little bit. That offense is pretty elusive. They'll be adding to it. I'm sure the offensive line is going to get, reworked, retweaked a little bit here and there. But back to our hometown favorite, the Buffalo Bills. They have been extremely active outside of the Stefon Diggs trade. They bring in A.J. Klein. They send Mario Addison. And they've made some moves, within the last, 24 hours that I want to get your take on. Vernon Butler. And Jefferson, the defensive tackle for Seattle. I'm really excited for the moves that they've made. Letting Shaq Lawson walk out the door to go to Miami, and letting Jordan Phillips walk out the door to go to Arizona, and then to replace those guys with who they have brought in. What are your thoughts on these moves, on this rearranging, if you will, of the defensive line of the Bills?
Yeah, well, I think the Bills always have, Brendan Beane specifically has a number in mind when it comes to players, because Shaq Lawson did say the Bills had an offer on the table. Obviously not what he was getting offered in Miami, so he chose more money, and you can't blame a guy for doing that. But, Brendan Beane kind of settles in and says, listen, this is the offer. You're either you can go test the market and then come back to us, let us know one way or the other. But if they do move on, he finds guys that can step right in and kind of replace them. So, with Shaq Lawson, obviously they replaced him with Mario Addison. Mario Addison, yes, he's going to be, I believe, 33 when the regular season begins. But this is a guy that's had 39 sacks over the last 4 seasons. Still been very productive against 2+ blockers. He can get after the quarterback more than Shaq Lawson has shown throughout his career. So definitely a guy that should bring more to the pass rush despite his age. Jordan Phillips gets the money in free agency from the Cardinals. I just think the Bills probably said, okay, I don't know if the 9.5 sacks is going to be able to be replicated again. As much as I liked Phillips, he was a little bit of a liability in the run game. So you bring in a guy like Quentin Jefferson, just like Matt Perino said earlier today, kind of flew under the radar a little bit on a lot of people's watches. But when you read about him, when you hear about him and how he's played in Seattle, he seems like he's going to be a really good fit here in Buffalo. Joe Marino, the Draft Network, said that he's an upgrade to Jordan Phillips because he can get after the quarterback, just like Phillips was able to do with success this past year. But he is much better in terms of run defense. And for whatever reason, some teams just kind of went away from running the ball against Buffalo last year. But when teams did try to run on them, certain times they had plenty of success. I recently rewatched the Thanksgiving Day game, and Elliott broke off some impressive runs in that game.
Yes, he did.
Jordan Howard had a nice day for the Eagles in that lopsided loss to the Bills. The first drive of the Giants game, Saquon Barkley just was able to do whatever he wanted against Buffalo. So the run defense was an issue at times last year, whether or not people recognize that or not. And I think Jefferson's going to come in and help immensely in that regard. And then Vernon Butler. Butler, there's some question marks. He didn't do much in his first few years. with the Panthers, but then he kind of broke out this season, had 6 sacks. But I'm not going to question the Bills for bringing him aboard because obviously Sean McDermott was there when they drafted him.
Right.
Brendan Bean was the assistant GM, but most of all, Eric Washington, the defensive line coach, has been with him his entire career. So whatever was unlocked with Butler this past year, Washington obviously must have felt confident enough to tell Bean and McDermott, listen, if we bring this guy in, here's how I plan to utilize him in our defense, and here's what I think he can do. So I like both signings. I just think adding more depth and talent to the defensive line is never a bad thing.
Never a bad thing in today's day and age. You got to get the quarterback that can throw the ball, and you got to get the guy that can hit the quarterback. And they, I think they've checked off both of those boxes. And as far as Quentin Jefferson goes, and as far as Vernon Butler goes, those are the new guys that they bring in. That's not even including who they already have, and obviously Ed Oliver is a name that comes to mind. But I remember, last summer, going to St. John Fisher and taking in the training camp and realizing that Harrison Phillips was on his way to putting forth the best training camp, preseason, maybe regular season of his life. I mean, this guy looked phenomenal up until he had that devastating injury. So getting him back into the fold, I think will be massive for the Buffalo Bills' success on defense. And as well, they bring in A.J. Klein, who brings that leadership dynamic, who seems to be that second effort tackler at the outside linebacker position, much like Lorenzo Alexander was. So that is a adequate replacement. And then the next name I will butcher, so I will leave you for the next name, Tyler, and then you can chime in on that one.
I actually will probably butcher that too. I haven't actually had a chance to sit down and listen to the pronunciation of that.
Right.
But special teams standout right there. Played his college ball at Temple. Kind of was described kind of the way Kiko Alonso was when the Bills drafted him. Kind of plays like his hair's on fire all over the place. He's led the NFL in special teams tackles over the last 4 years. If you add up the totals, tied for the lead in special teams tackles this past season. So definitely a guy that they think can help on special teams, could add some provided depth. Never really got an opportunity to see a lot of playing time defensively in Pittsburgh. There's always another guy that kind of was in front of him. So, maybe he can step up as a backup and get more snaps in Buffalo. Obviously not a guy that's going to be competing, though, for a starting role. But then, like you said, A.J. Klein, the Bills run a lot of nickel defense, so that third linebacker spot wasn't going to be as important as some made it out to be. Klein is going to be a quality replacement there. He can also contribute on special teams, obviously familiar with this coaching staff and this regime, so a lot of benefits to bringing him in. I remember when he originally left Carolina and signed with the Saints, there were some people who thought he could be a target for the Bills at that point. So, decent in coverage. He's not outstanding, but that's to be expected. You obviously want linebackers that can cover in today's NFL, but they have that in Milano. They have that in Edmonds. It's not realistic to expect to get a third linebacker that can do it at a high level of the way that Milano and Edmonds can do it.
As far as the offensive side of the ball, you still have some needs there, in my opinion. You got to get some more depth on the offensive line. That'll probably come, maybe a free agency move, maybe a draft pick, either or both. And then I think a position that needs a little bit more of a boost is running back. And, Devin Singletary, I think from my assessment of Singletary, I think he is a better player than even the Bills imagined him to be. In terms of what he brought to the table this past season, he did have that, hammy injury. I believe it was his hamstring at midway through his rookie year. But coming back, I thought he was phenomenal. But Frank Gore out the building. You need that adequate number 2 running back. I don't know if T.J. Yeldon is that guy. Who would you say would be a decent running back 2 to bring in maybe on the free agent market?
Oh, well, one guy that I had my eye on was Jordan Howard, but obviously he signed with the Dolphins and actually got a pretty decent deal there.
$5 million a year, right? $5 million.
Yeah.
for 10. 2 years, $10 million.
Carlos Yep. Carlos Hyde, though, is a guy to keep an eye on. I think that he can come in and contribute in terms of the veteran market. He'd probably be my next guy to keep an eye on there. But there are other guys in the NFL in free agency, so to speak. But this draft, though, too, if the Bills really want to wait until the draft, you can find a compliment for him.
Oh, for
sure.
sure.
I'm not saying they have to wait, they have to take a guy in round 2, but in round 2, maybe Swift falls to round 2. I don't think he'd fall to 54. They'd probably have to trade up to get him. But same probably with Dobbins. But you have guys like Jonathan Taylor, Edwards-Helaire from LSU. I think Cam Akers is a guy to keep an eye on. I think that they really like Cam Akers. But then you also have guys like Zach Moss, Benjamin. Like you said, I think that Singletary exceeded all expectations as a rookie. I think that they realize he can be the guy. So you need to find someone that can complement him. You don't have to reach for someone in free agency, which they're not going to do. They might still bring in a veteran and draft a player just to, more competition will bring out the best in everyone. But I think you can find someone with that second, third, fourth round pick and really not have to worry about the running back room so much, even with one of their fifth round picks, because I know they parted with one of them in the trade, but they still have some options there. They acquired a fifth-round pick in that Wyatt Teller trade. It's unknown which fifth-round pick they sent away right now, but they still have plenty of picks to address that position.
Right, and they have been able to draft solid mid-round talent, including Devin Singletary. So I'm not worried about their their acumen to this point. They've completely revitalized this entire roster. Now with Shaq Lawson out the door, there is no player on the team from the Doug Whaley, Rex Ryan era, which is pretty remarkable. And they've made the playoffs 2 out of the last 3 seasons, and most, media analysts, websites out there would hold the belief that you hold and that I hold, and that the Bills can really take this AFC East division over with the talent that they've acquired over the last few years, with this new look team, this youth movement, if you will. And running back is a position that you can definitely take a flyer on. Jonathan Taylor is one of those guys in the draft that I really like, and Akers as well is another running back that I really like. So it'll be very interesting to see what direction they go in at that position. Back to the defensive side of the ball, you have some players that will be looking to be re-signed. Trey White, I think you got to get him locked up. And much to my surprise, and in a good way, I was pleasantly surprised that the Buffalo Bills re-signed Jordan Poyer. What does that mean to this defense, Ryan?
Well, Poyer came right in and outplayed his contract right out of the gate. So this is a case of them rewarding a player who has come in, done all the right things. That's another thing, and that helps in the locker room too. I know some people will kind of just say, "Oh, I don't know about that," but look what they've done. They extended Jerry Hughes because Hughes did things the right way when the time came. They re-signed Quentin Spain, a guy that came in, outplayed his contract. They were able to agree on a set of price, both parties, that they found to be agreeable, and they rewarded him. They rewarded Poyer. So now it's going to start costing a little bit more money to reward these players. Like you said, Trey White, we're probably going to be getting close to that $20 million a year on average point with White, but he's earned it. He is arguably the best cornerback in the NFL, easily within the top 2, top 3. You're talking guys like Matt Milano you're going to want to lock up, probably talking 12, 13 million there. And then you have a guy like Deion Dawkins where, he had a rough second season, but he really bounced back in 2019.
Right.
It's the best season of his young career. I think having Quentin Spain helped him. I think having Spain again this year will help him. If they don't get the contract done before this year, I think he could have another great season or a better season even than he's had, where then all of a sudden you have to pay him. So you have to pick and choose. You can't keep everyone, unfortunately. But the one thing I'll say is Brendan Beane has been building around this roster with a lot of short-term deals, 2-3-year deals. A lot of these free agents that they brought in this year on these short contracts that are very manageable. So you can pay your star players here and there, but you can also build it up and find players that fit your defense, fit your offense, fit your scheme without breaking the bank.
I love it. Yeah, I completely agree. And that is what I love about Brandon Beane in terms of what he has done to fortify the roster, bring in talent, bring in vets, draft picks. I mean, this team is a contender, Ryan. I mean, I couldn't say that at any other point and actually mean it and actually have, bullet point results as to why I feel that way and why you feel that way. It's a fun and exciting time, even in a time like this where everybody is secluded and kind of locked in their houses right now due to the COVID-19 virus. But the one thing we can say is that sports always finds a way to keep us going, and the Bills have been able to give us a lot of tidbits of news to kind of chew on and to appreciate and to enjoy for this upcoming season, 2020. I got a feeling, Ryan, this is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, I think that, right now, to be a Bills fan, I think it's an exciting time. Like you said, playoffs 2 of the last 3 years. Brady's gone. The AFC East is there for the taking. But starting this year, though, I think expectations have to be raised. We shouldn't just be happy, or the fans shouldn't just be happy getting into the playoffs. At this point, now it's about winning games in the playoffs. So
right.
Be excited over the fact that this division is there for the taking. The Bills can win the East for the first time since 1995. I think it legitimately could happen. But don't just be excited about making the playoffs. Have those expectations now of actually winning some games here. I'm not saying it's Super Bowl or bust in 2020, but you should be thinking, making a run in these playoffs.
I completely agree. It's about taking that next step, and knocking on the door can only last so long. Eventually, you got to kick it down if someone doesn't answer it. So, I think that this is going to be a really fun time to be a Bills fan. These past couple seasons, really since they've drafted Josh Allen, it has been really fun watching these games. And they've had some more primetime spotlight. They achieved really big moments within their 2019 season on primetime against Dallas, Thanksgiving, as well as clinching that playoff berth in Pittsburgh against the Steelers on Sunday Night Football. So I'm really looking forward to 2020. And, Ryan, I look forward to having you on again to end the show. I hold out the belief, as far as the AFC goes, that the Dolphins will be better than the Jets. What do you think of that?
Well, based on the moves they've made, I don't think that's a wild jump, but I still need to see what they're going to do at quarterback. I think Fitzpatrick is a fine bridge, but what happens in the draft if someone leapfrogs them before they can go on the board and someone takes Tua? Are they going to go with the Oregon quarterback? Does that change their plans altogether? So there's still a lot of questions there, because I still think Sam Darnold is a very talented quarterback, but that would not surprise me. So depending on what the Jets do in terms of Robbie Anderson and getting him some help, I don't think that you're too far off in terms of that prediction.
And I feel like the players in Miami buy into Brian Flores more. And as we touched on it earlier, we see 2 former Patriots go over to Miami, head down to South Beach, and join forces with their old, head coach. So Kyle Van Noy was one of them, and there was another one. It's not coming to me right now, but I definitely feel like Miami. They're going to be a lot better in terms of talent. They have, I believe, 3 or 4 first-round draft picks, but you really got to hit on those picks. If they can hit on those picks, they should jump ahead of the Jets, but I'm still feeling the Buffalo Bills will have that 1 next to their logo.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the Bills should be viewed as the favorite. I'm still going to give a lot of respect to the Patriots with Belichick. I'm sure that he's going to be able to game plan and manage a way to pull out some wins in this division.
Right.
But it's there for the taking. And when you look across the board, overall talent, I think the Bills stand out more than any other team in this division.
I love it. Well, Ryan, thank you for joining me. We'll definitely talk again. I think the next time we talk, we're going to be talking about, probably the preseason and who's making the roster. We'll get you on around that time, if not sooner, and give some content to the Bills fans out there.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All righty, Ryan. Thanks for joining me from one Ryan to another. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, my pleasure as well.
Take care. So that was Ryan Talbot of NYUp.com joining me on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. And, we got a lot of stuff in the works as far as off-season coverage. I broke it at the beginning of the show. The Jacksonville Jaguars have traded Nick Foles to the Chicago Bears. Bears are giving up their compensatory fourth-round pick, number 140 overall, which now gives the Jaguars 12 picks in the upcoming draft. And the Bears now have a quarterback to compete with Mitch Trubisky. I thought Andy Dalton would wind up being a Chicago Bear. I really did. I thought Matt Nagy would make that happen, but it looked like he wanted to work with Foles as that bridge quarterback to Mitch Trubisky. Now, I think this affects one man more than any other, and that is Andy Dalton. But one team more than any other is the New England Patriots. I think Dalton could end up going to the New England Patriots. I think it makes sense now that Brady is out of the building, and Dalton could be a quarterback that could help New England rebuild, retool, revamp in the coming years. Really excited for some future news. I had Kevin Massari on the show yesterday. We're going to be doing a weekly show in all things regarding to the Buffalo Bills. We'll have that announcement soon. We know what it's going to be called. I don't want to give it away just yet. We don't have the logo just yet, but I know that that will be presented by Trainwreck Sports on the Trainwreck Sports Podcast Network. And I will be hosting the show. Kevin will be co-hosting the show. We'll be going back and forth, debating on all sorts of topics as well, throughout the season. So I look forward to that. Look forward to bringing you more episodes of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I will still be recording Bills episodes on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, but they will not be on the Trainwreck Sports Network, Trainwreck Sports Podcast Network. They'll be separate from that. Those will be presented and produced by myself. And, we'll be putting that out. I'm really enjoying this, really enjoying dabbling in all sorts of content, whether it's my podcast that I'm producing, whether it's another podcast that I'll be starting up soon, or whether that's joining any podcast as a guest. I got a lot of guest spots coming up ahead of me, reacting to all things Buffalo Bills. So I'm very excited for that and much, much more. So stay tuned. As always, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast is on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can follow me on Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take. You can also give a shout out to Ryan Talbot. It's at Ryan Talbot Bills as well. NYUp.com. Ryan Talbot and Matt Perino are doing big things on that site, providing Bills fans with all sorts of coverage pertaining to NFL free agency, the NFL draft, and much, much more. Thank you so much for tuning in. And take care. Be safe out there, everybody. Stay inside. Social distancing is important in times like these. And for all the people that are now, sitting at home, out of a job, my thoughts are with you guys and girls out there. Anyone that works at the restaurants, the bars, you name it, that have been closed off to their job, my thoughts are with you. I'm really hoping that this ends sooner rather than later, and we can all continue our day-to-day lives and really appreciate what we have around us, the people we have around us, the simplicities of life, I think are really hindsight 2020 sometimes. And with this stuff going on, we have to appreciate the normalcies that life provides us. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Take care.